Yo Gotti has just been handed a heavy sentence in connection with young Dolph's murder. And for a lot of observers, it doesn't come as a shock, especially after the triggerman testified that Gotti's own brother financed the hit. In court, the questioning was blunt. Who ordered a price on whose head, how much was offered, and where did the money come from? The figure that kept surfacing was $100,000 for Dolph, and the allegation tying it back up the chain was that the operation ran at Gotti's request. That's the framework. Now here are the details. Memphis has been bracing for this outcome for years, watching two powerful camps play a lethal, long-running game in the same city. With verdicts in and key testimony on the record, the prosecution's narrative of young Dolph's assassination landed with finality. It stemmed from a feud that spiraled far beyond music, a fight between Adolph Thornton Jr. and Mario Mims, known to the world as Young Dolph and Yo Gotti. The tension dates to around 2014 and escalated through diss tracks, public taunts, and bursts of gunfire, but what truly drove it wasn't just chart position, it was authority, territory, and the pride that can turn disagreements into funerals when egos outrun caution. The picture crystallized during Memphis's most-watched murder proceedings in years. Prosecutors treated the jury to a methodical, documentary-like sequence: surveillance angles, call logs, shell casings, names, and numbers. Justin Johnson's conviction on September 26, 2024, first-degree murder and conspiracy, produced a life sentence plus 35 years. But his guilty verdict was just the visible tip of a much larger structure. The prosecution's most explosive moment came from Cornelius Smith, the second man at the scene who chose to cooperate and, under oath, laid out the money, the meetings, and the chain of command. Smith identified Johnson as the other shooter and described a guaranteed payment that never materialized. According to his testimony reported by local outlets, the job was pitched at $40,000 for each gunman, yet what arrived to him later, by letter, was a mere $500 and change. The mismatch between promised payout and what? He says he actually received detonated in the courtroom because it tied the low-level mechanics directly to higher-level planning. Then came the allegation that rewired the entire conspiracy. Smith said Anthony Big Jook Mims, Yo Gotti's brother, set a $100,000 bounty on Dolph. That isn't routine neighborhood money. That's big-ticket blood cash, and it underscored how serious the plotters were about removing Dolph from the board for good. Prosecutors built a timeline they described as calculated rather than impulsive. Smith placed meetings with Hernandez, Govan, and Big Jook ahead of the shooting, and floated a motive beyond pure revenge, suggesting that taking Dolph out could clear space for Justin Johnson to secure a CMG deal. In that version, the hit wasn't just about eliminating a rival, it was about shaping a roster and tightening control, with business goals woven into violence. The technical evidence reinforced the story. Surveillance footage captured the moments, leading up to the killing at Makita's homemade butter cookies. Dolph wearing his PRE chain, his brother Marcus in frame, a white Mercedes rolling up, two masked shooters stepping out. Johnson held a handgun. Smith carried higher caliber firepower. The footage and the choreography, approach, exit, volleys of rounds, swift retreat, didn't look like a spontaneous outburst. It looked like a mission rehearsed and bankrolled. What cut deepest came from loved ones. Mia J., Dolph's longtime partner, described the aftermath not in headlines, but in a child's rage, the way their son's demeanor changed in the wake of his father's killing. Her voice caught when she explained that the boy, once steady and even-tempered, started pushing back at everyone, a small person trying to muscle through grief that had nowhere to go. This is the cost that never trends for long. families reorganizing around a hole that will never be filled, children trying to grow around trauma that arrived with sirens and tape. The money trail, as presented by prosecutors, had more threads than the shooter's envelope. Beyond the alleged $100,000 bounty and the $40,000 per shooter promise, the state pointed to a $50,000 payment for Smith's legal fees that they linked to CMG, an assertion that raised the most uncomfortable question of all. Why would a label spend on lawyers for men accused of killing their rival unless the ties ran deeper? The autopsy was its own grim ledger. 22 gunshot wounds. In a courtroom, numbers can be detached. Here, they spelled out overkill, the kind of obliteration associated with anger accumulated over years. Layered onto that were the logistics prosecutors said, traced to Hernandez Govan, still awaiting his day in court. His alleged role, connecting Big Jook's money to shooters and laying out the path, finding personnel, setting terms, coordinating movement. The state cast him as the middle point where power met the street, the person who could translate a directive into a plan and a plan into a body count. Chillingly, days before the murder, Dolph was doing what he usually did, moving through Memphis. With gratitude, stopping to thank staff at a cancer clinic that had helped his family, coordinating his annual turkey giveaways. He was still showing up for the city that shaped him while, according to prosecutors, others were finalizing when and where to take him down. Even the side stories felt like plot twists. In January 2024, Anthony Big Jook Mims was shot and killed near a Memphis restaurant. Whether retaliation or silencing, the timing made the internet run hot. Whatever else he might have said, he took with him. Prosecutors insisted they weren't leaning solely on witnesses. Cell phone data, videos, vehicle forensics, and that letter with a few $100s became the hardware of the case. Together with Smith's testimony, they drew a map of coordination: calls, before, movement during, money after. Yo Gotti's proximity through his brother's alleged role kept his name orbiting the narrative. The idea that his organization underwrote fees for the accused, alongside a long pattern of violence directed at threats to CMG's footprint, fed a broader portrait of a machine that protects its interests without blinking. While lawyers debated admissibility and relevance, the crowd outside embraced the broader implication. This wasn't random. It was industrial. Mia J's anecdotes about their son returned as a refrain. A 7-year-old trying to assert himself in ways that made no sense until you factored in loss. That is the generational echo of a single shooting. Mentorship programs, discipline classes, anything to keep grief from hardening into something worse. Again and again, the narrative circled back to a thesis. This was never just a clash of rappers. It was a campaign to erase a man whose independence and influence threatened the pecking order. To understand how the ground got this fertile for violence, you have to rewind. The Dolph-Gotti rivalry didn't materialize overnight. Around 2014, Dolph claimed he declined a CMG deal, choosing independence instead. In a city where status and hierarchy matter, turning down the de facto king looked like a public slight. 2 years later, Dolph released King of Memphis, a title that read like a challenge. In 2017, he dropped Play Wit Yo Be Fi Pouf, taunting Gotti and bragging in ways that lit the fuse. Within days, in Charlotte, more than 100 rounds hit Dolph's bulletproof SUV. He survived and turned the attempt into 100 shots, rapping at whoever tried and missed. That fall, in Los Angeles, Dolph was shot and hospitalized. Yo Gotti was named a person of interest and later cleared. Street takeaway: 2 tries in 1 year is a pattern. During those years, Black Youngsta kept heat on the feud with threats and stunts. Charges around a 2019 incident later fell away, but the associations lingered. The Memphis scene is territorial by history, and Gotti's climb involved conflict. The Dolph friction was different because it was relentlessly personal. By 2019, Dolph publicly brushed off reconciliation. By then, the wheels were already turning and couldn't be unwound. When Dolph was killed in November 2021, the shock moved quickly through the industry. Key Glock, Dolph's cousin and closest collaborator, barely spoke publicly. When he finally did, he described existing but not healing, standing still between better and worse. He said he couldn't shake the feeling, no matter how he tried. Mia J. found herself explaining death and justice to children who should have been learning multiplication instead. Dolph had been frank about danger long before Makita's. In an interview years earlier, he said he'd been a target since his IB's late teens, part of growing up where he grew up. The day finally arrived on November 17, 2021, when all the talk and threats and near misses collapsed into a few seconds of gunfire in a bakery parking lot. The trial put names to those seconds, then pulled back to show the contours of something bigger. Once the gavel fell, the state told the jury they weren't just punishing a single act. They were sending a warning about contracts paid in cash and settled in bullets. 4 hours of deliberation produced a unanimous verdict against Justin Johnson. The judge layered on time for the other offenses, firearms, conspiracy, on top of life for the murder. The courtroom language was restrained. The message wasn't. Still pending is the case against Hernandez Govan, scheduled for August 18, 2025, in which prosecutors say they'll show how orders and money moved through him. Jamarcus Johnson, Justin's half-brother, admitted to helping after the fact and faces years for accessory conduct. Even at the family level, the web tugged people in. The script would be incomplete without the life it erased. Dolph started releasing music around 2008 and formed Paper Route Empire in 2010, building a business that inspired others to stay independent. He famously said no to a reported $22 million deal in 2018 to keep control. King of Memphis reached number 49 on the Billboard 200. Rich Slave peaked at number 4, proof he could win without going corporate. More important than charts, he kept showing up in Memphis, handing out turkeys, talking to patients and staff at treatment centers his family had leaned on, putting money into neighborhoods in ways that didn't need press. 2 days before he died, he was making the rounds again. Gratitude and generosity as routine. At home, he and Mia J. were partners since 2012, raising Trey and Aria and planning what came next. After the shooting, grief metabolized into a mission. The family launched Black Men Deserve to Grow Old, a brand-turned campaign his children helped design, with proceeds supporting grassroots anti-violence work. In the years since, murals spread across Memphis and beyond, adding color to loss and insisting memory is a form of resistance. Young Dolph's death didn't end the feud. It clarified it. It underscored how independence can put a target on your back when your success argues that gatekeepers aren't necessary. It showed how the line between label politics and street economics can blur until both become indistinguishable. It demonstrated how conspiracy isn't a movie word. It's logistics and money orders and rental cars and text messages. It left a community measuring justice not just by sentences handed down, but by whether children can sleep without fighting ghosts. The legal track says one chapter is closed. A shooter convicted, a sentence that will outlast his lifetime, a judge stating the obvious, that paid murders won't be tolerated. Another case waits on the calendar. The alleged middleman set to face a jury, unless he misses another date or the schedule shifts again. The figure at the top of the original rivalry remains the name everyone circles back to, whether they say it out loud or not, because the allegations braided his family into the planning. Even without a courtroom verdict on that question, the narrative outside runs on its own rails. What remains, beyond filings, pressers, and docket numbers, is the argument that Dolph made by living the way he did. That ownership matters. That home matters. That there are better ways to be powerful than to disappear someone who challenges you. The courtroom can only do so much. The rest is whether the city he loved can keep building the thing he imagined, even while it keeps telling the story of what took him away.